Welcome to the deep dive. If you've ever, wrestled with failure or maybe wondered why trying to stay perfectly safe feels, well, strangely limiting sometimes, then this deep dive is definitely for you.
Mm-hmm.
We are jumping right into a pretty deep psychological and biological paradox today.
Yeah, it's this idea that the real path to strength, to lasting stability, isn't necessarily found by dodging stress or challenge.
Right. It might actually come from intentionally seeking out and crucially processing manageable discomfort.
Exactly that. That tension, between our deep desire for safety and what seems like a necessity for challenge, that's what we really want to unpack.
And we've got some fascinating sources lined up.
We do. They cover critical mechanisms across neuroscience, cognitive behavior, even relationship theory.
Yeah.
Our mission really is to synthesize the science behind antifragility.
Antifragility.
Right.
Meaning,
How does the human system move beyond just, surviving tough times? How does it actively transform those difficult events into a foundation for real growth?
okay, so we're looking for the blueprint of strength forged in fire,
That's a
essentially.
good way to put it.
And the ultimate aim, I think, is captured really well in this concept of post-traumatic growth, or PTG.
Right. PTG, it's not just about getting over it or bouncing back to baseline.
No, it's more than that.
Yeah.
It's the ability to look back at a past crisis and genuinely see positives that came out of it,
Like maybe a deeper appreciation for life.
or increased confidence in your own abilities, maybe a big shift in what you value.
It's basically hard evidence that a really deep setback can become the raw material for a kind of personal structural upgrade.
A powerful idea. So where do we start?
To really get how challenges turn into these upgrades, we first need to look inside at the cognitive architecture, our
Right.
mindsets. They're like the filters we use to interpret pressure.
And that interpretation dictates everything that follows, growth or shutdown.
Pretty much, it dictates whether stress leads to genuine growth or just, a defensive shutdown.
Okay, let's start with the big one, failure. Because that really feels like the ultimate stress test for any mindset. How does what we believe about ability change how we process falling flat on our face?
Well, Carol Dweck's work is absolutely foundational here. If you come at things with a fixed mindset.
The idea that talent and character are just fixed traits, you got them or you don't.
Exactly. So when failure happens, it's not seen as, say, a temporary glitch in strategy or effort.
It feels like a verdict.
A verdict, yeah. An irrefutable judgment on some unchangeable flaw you have. Your whole identity feels threatened.
And when your identity feels threatened like that, what's the typical reaction? Sounds like it spirals downwards.
It often does. It's a kind of defensive loop. Initially, the fixed mindset can trigger, intense emotions, maybe righteous anger at something external.
Blame the situation or someone else.
Right. But then that's often followed quickly by this kind of paralyzing guilt and self-blame.
Hmm.
But the critical problem is what comes next, or rather what doesn't come next. There's a behavioral void. Because they believe the ability itself is fixed, they fundamentally lack a strategy for real change. They just promise themselves, I've got to try harder or I'll never do that again.
Hoping willpower alone will fix it.
Yeah, hoping sheer willpower will keep that supposed fundamental flaw hidden instead of actually developing tangible, concrete coping mechanisms or trying different strategies. They end up protecting the image of being competent.
Rather than actually investing in becoming more competent in the future.
Exactly. It's all about image protection.
Wow. That sounds like a recipe for stagnation, honestly.
It really can be.
So, conversely, the growth mindset. This allows for a quicker recovery, right? By reframing the whole experience. What's going on psychologically for someone with that more optimistic view?
Well, the optimist, the person operating from that growth mindset, they tend to recover almost immediately from that momentary feeling of helplessness after a defeat.
Oh.
They see the setback as temporary. And specific to that situation, it's not taken as, pervasive proof that they're a failure as a person.
They believe ability is learnable.
Crucially, yes, ability is learnable. So failure just becomes information. It's a vital piece of data telling them what to adjust on the road to eventual victory.
So they don't waste energy on guilt.
Much less so. They move pretty directly to strategizing. Okay, what went wrong? What can I try differently? Effort becomes the tool you use to expand your abilities, not just proof that you weren't talented enough to succeed without trying.
That reframing completely changes the game for resilience, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Okay, so if growth needs sustained effort over time, how do we structure challenges to keep motivation going? Because like you said, Most real transformations aren't quick sprints, they're more like marathon habits.
That's a great point. And this is where the mechanics of motivation ideally shift from feeling like you have to push yourself,
Which feels exhausting.
right, to more of a pull system. We keep desire alive over the long haul by consistently working on tasks that are of just manageable difficulty.
Ah, the Goldilocks zone. Not too hard, not too easy.
Precisely. Challenging enough that you have to engage and put in effort, but not so overwhelming that it triggers that fixed mindset panic and shutdown.
How do you find that sweet spot in practice? It sounds tricky.
It is a bit tricky, and it's dynamic. You find it by sort of continuously testing your limits and then maybe backing off just slightly when frustration starts feeling paralyzing rather than motivating.
So it's a constant adjustment.
Yeah, a dynamic balance. If the task is too easy, you get bored, you lose desire because there's nothing new, no real identity challenge.
Right.
But if it's way too hard, you feel helpless, you feel overwhelmed, and you just stop. That just manageable threshold ensures the challenge actively feeds a continuous desire for mastery, and it provides those little hits of positive feedback along the way.
But the sources also emphasize something interesting here.
Yeah?
That success in habits isn't just about the score, the measurable output. It's about reinforcing who you are.
Yes, this is so important.
How is just showing up, even for a low-performance effort, sometimes more important than nailing a high-performance result?
It's absolutely crucial for building that long-term anti-fragility. Remember how we said the fixed mindset tries to protect its image?
Yeah.
Well, the growth mindset is about actively building and reinforcing a new identity. Think about someone trying to start an exercise habit.
Okay.
Going to the gym for just 5 minutes, maybe they only stretch, maybe they just walk on the treadmill slowly.
Yeah.
That still successfully reaffirms the identity of, I am the type of person who doesn't miss workouts.
Ah, I see. The consistency itself is the win.
The consistency, especially showing up when you really don't feel like it, that's the most profound psychological shift. If you only count the days you have a great workout, you're always vulnerable to that all or nothing cycle. You miss one, you feel like a failure, you quit.
Right, the whole thing collapses.
But maintaining that identity shift, that sense of self as someone who persists, someone who is resilient, that's the stable foundation that helps you weather the inevitable setbacks.
That connects the psychology to the behavior really nicely.
Okay, let's go even deeper now, maybe into the biology, the architecture of strength itself. It sounds a bit counterintuitive, but our sources suggest that psychological growth kind of mirrors processes in the brain where strength is actually gained through removal, not just accumulation.
It's a really fascinating parallel between developmental neuroscience and resilience, neural efficiency. So early in life, the nervous system produces this massive, almost overwhelming excess of neurons, fibers, synaptic connections.
By casting a really wide net initially.
Exactly. Think of it as a maximal but kind of disorganized structure. Then a huge and totally necessary part of maturation involves this large-scale pruning or selective cell death.
Pruning, like trimming a plant.
Precisely. It gets rid of the excessive, the unnecessary, or the inefficient connections.
So we're literally getting stronger by deleting information. That sounds backwards. Why does removing parts make the whole system more resilient? Because it makes the system dramatically more efficient and much better organized. When you prune away all those noisy, redundant, or unused neural pathways, the connections that remain, the ones that are specialized and used, can transmit signals faster and with much greater clarity.
Okay, so it's not just about getting bigger, it's about getting streamlined.
Exactly. Streamlined. And the implication for personality development, for psychological resilience, is pretty profound. The mind, much like the brain, seems to mature and become stronger, more resilient, not by trying to maximize every single potential thought or behavior.
But by actively identifying and removing what's not working.
Yes, removing what's unnecessary or injurious or just inefficient for its function, things like those self-defeating behavioral patterns we talked about, or maybe toxic internal self-talk. It's a process of refinement through reduction, strength through subtraction, in a way.
Wow. Okay, so if strength requires embracing behavioral challenges, the next step seems to be embracing challenges in our internal world, our beliefs. We naturally crave intellectual comfort, right? Perfect coherence.
We really do.
Yet Leon Festinger's work on cognitive dissonance seems to show that uncomfortable information, that internal conflict, is actually the engine that drives necessary change.
Absolutely. Dissonance, that mental stress you feel when you hold two conflicting beliefs, or maybe when you act in a way that goes against a deeply held belief, it's pretty much unavoidable in human decision-making.
And that discomfort isn't just annoying, it actually does something.
It's not benign at all. It's a really powerful motivational force. To get rid of that discomfort, the individual feels compelled to do something. Either change one of the beliefs, change the behavior that's causing the conflict, or kind of rationalize or reassess the value of whatever is causing the conflict.
So the brain is actively trying to reduce the pain of being internally inconsistent. And you give us an example of just how strong that pressure is. How far will we go to create that coherent story?
Oh, the classic example is Festinger's 1959 study, the one where they paid participants to lie.
Right, I remember this one.
So students did this deliberately really boring, tedious task. Then they're asked to tell the next person waiting that the task was actually fun and engaging. A clear case of dissonance, right? Their behavior lying conflicted with their belief that task was incredibly dull.
Okay.
Now, here's the twist. Half the students were paid a decent sum for the time, like $20, which was a good amount back then. That's high external justification for the lie.
So they could easily tell themselves, yeah, I lied, but hey, 20 bucks is 20 bucks. They could dismiss the conflict.
Precisely. They felt very little pressure to actually change their internal belief about the task. However, the other group, they were paid only $1. Minimal external justification.
So they couldn't easily rationalize the lie. I sold all my honesty for $1. That feels bad.
Exactly. They experienced intense dissonance. They couldn't really justify lying for such a tiny amount. And since they couldn't undo the lie they'd already told, the brain's path of least resistance was to change the internal belief.
You're kidding. They convinced themselves the task wasn't that bad.
They actually did. When asked later, they genuinely rated the boring task as significantly more enjoyable than the $20 group did. It just reveals the sheer force of dissonance. When you don't have a good external reason for your actions, your mind will literally alter your perception of reality just to get back to psychological harmony.
That's profound. It means we might change our core view of things just to feel consistent inside. That must have huge implications for how we handle information, especially information that challenges us.
Massive implications,
Yeah.
particularly regarding the information we choose to consume or avoid.
Right. If I'm feeling conflicted about something I do, say, smoking,
Okay.
I'm probably highly motivated to avoid any facts that make me feel even more uncomfortable about it.
That's the defensive response kicking in, and it's a major roadblock to developing antifragility. Individuals experiencing that kind of conflict, like the health risks of smoking versus the act of smoking, they are highly likely to actively avoid information that increases the dissonance.
Or they'll selectively seek out information that supports their habit.
Exactly. They'll spend time reviewing only the stuff that helps reduce the dissonance. They might look for articles about lifelong smokers who live to 90, or maybe just deny the validity of the research altogether. It's an active process of cognitive self-protection.
Resisting those unsettling facts to maintain that internal coherence, even if the coherence is built around something harmful.
Yes. And this cognitive self-protection, it doesn't just happen inside our heads, it extends deeply into our social lives too.
We look for backup from others.
Constantly. We seek affirmation to make our personal stories, our beliefs, feel correct and valid, especially when those beliefs are maybe being challenged by outside evidence or opinions.
Safety in numbers.
Pretty much. When individuals feel that dissonance creeping in because of conflicting external views or decisions they've made, often the very first instinct is to find other people who share their view.
And that makes the discomfort go down.
Instantly. That social support is a powerful dissonance reduction tool. Getting that affirmation, aligning your thoughts with your peers, it immediately lessens the psychological sting of potentially being wrong or alone in your belief.
And what happens if the group offering that support is, really attractive or desirable to be a part of? Does that amplify the effect?
Oh, absolutely. The drive to conform goes up dramatically. If a group is seen as appealing, high status, cool, powerful, whatever, members are more likely to actually change their own opinions, even on things unrelated to the group's core purpose, just to ensure they align and minimize the dissonance of being the odd one out.
So you become more willing to adopt the group's norms, sometimes even if your own experience contradicts them.
Often, yes. The group provides the coherent reality map, and fitting into that map feels safer than navigating alone with conflicting data.
It makes sense. And conversely, media influence is strongest when we don't have those social counterarguments readily available.
Right. If you're isolated or don't have easy access to strong alternative viewpoints, a media message can plant seeds of doubt or belief more easily. And any lingering dissonance you might feel about that message often gets resolved pretty quickly once you interact socially with others who reinforce the original message.
So we might actually prefer being comfortably wrong within our tribe than enduring the discomfort of being potentially right, but feeling isolated with conflicting thoughts.
Mm.
That's a serious cognitive load we're trying to shed.
It really is. Now let's pivot slightly to another, maybe less obvious cognitive burden, the task of learning irrelevance. We tend to think of the world as just being full of relevant and irrelevant stuff.
Yeah, some things matter, some things don't. Seems obvious.
But our sources suggest that the irrelevance of most context-dependent things isn't something we just know innately. It's something the nervous system actually has to learn.
Wait, hang on. We have to learn what to ignore. Why is that so crucial for us to function?
Think about it. If your brain processed every single sight, sound, smell, thought, and sensation as equally relevant all the time.
You'd be instantly paralyzed.
Yeah.
Total information overload.
Exactly. It's an impossible cognitive burden. To act, to even make sense of the world, the nervous system, and it seems like the frontal cortex plays a big role here, has to temporarily fixate on a chosen level of analysis. It essentially has to act as if that level is the only relevant reality for that moment.
So it narrows the focus arbitrarily.
In a way, yes. This restriction of data is what makes both understanding and taking action possible. We have to learn, actively, to filter out the immense amount of background noise.
That process of learning what not to pay attention to sounds like it must take energy. What's the cognitive cost when we encounter constant novelty?
Well, novel things, new occurrences, they initially carry this kind of dual aspect. They represent both potential threat and potential promise.
Danger and opportunity at the same time.
Right. So they induce this kind of a priori fear and hope simultaneously. The brain then has to rapidly assess, okay, what's the appropriate level of analysis here? Is this a threat I need to mobilize against or a promise I should approach?
And it has to pick one act.
It has to temporarily fixate on one aspect, threat or promise, just to make action possible. And that whole evaluation process is a significant cognitive drain.
And does this learning to ignore things have lasting effects?
It does. Studies on conditioning show that this learned irrelevance is actually powerful enough to interfere with later learning if the situation changes and something previously ignored suddenly becomes important.
Wow.
And interestingly, when familiar things do grab our attention, maybe because they signal something rewarding, now that original curiosity or hope aspect seems to be driven by dopamine activation in the nucleus accumbens.
The reward center.
Yeah, the same brain region that gets activated by things like drugs of abuse,
Mhm.
which just highlights the intense biological effort the brain puts into processing new information, assigning relevance, and then building these protective mechanisms to conserve energy by learning what it can afford to ignore.
Fascinating. Okay, let's shift gears a bit now, from the cognitive load to the actual physiological machinery of stress. It feels like our capacity for strength, for resilience, is deeply tied to how well we can regulate our internal state, right?
Absolutely intrinsically tied. Especially when we face really severe stress, the ability to return to a state of regulation after the threat has passed, that's arguably the core definition of true resilience.
And this is where the polyvagal theory comes in, offering a kind of map.
Exactly. It provides a crucial roadmap. It describes the nervous system's responses as evolving through three main phylogenetic stages.
Sure.
There's the newest system, the myelinated vagus nerve, which enables social engagement. Then there's the slightly older sympathetic nervous system, responsible for mobilization, fight, or flight. And the oldest is the unmyelinated vagus, linked to immobilization or shutdown, the freeze response.
Okay, and the key to resilience, to that rapid recovery you mentioned, seems to be located in that newest system, the myelinated vagus controlling the vagal brake. How does that work?
Right, the vagal brake. The myelinated vagus is actually unique to mammals. It acts as this incredibly sophisticated, almost instantaneous adjuster of our physiological state.
Ow.
It evolved specifically to dampen or put the brakes on those high arousal defensive systems, fight, flight, freeze, when we are in the presence of others we perceive as safe.
Through social cues, like facial expression, tone of voice.
Exactly. Those cues signal safety, and the vagal brake engages. Functionally, it lowers our baseline heart rate, it promotes a calm, socially engaged state, it helps keep our system operating within its optimal window of tolerance.
It's a biological safety anchor, allowing us to connect even when there might be mild stress around.
That's a great way to think about it.
But what happens if this system gets compromised? Say, through a history of chronic trauma or abuse, what's the cost to resilience then?
The cost is enormous. A history of abuse or just prolonged overwhelming stress can actually lower the tonic influence of that vagal brake. Its resting state is less effective.
So the brake doesn't work as well?
Essentially, yes. This limits the system's ability to rapidly calm down, to recover, to maintain that calm physiological state. The person loses the capacity to regulate quickly.
Leading to instability.
Chronic instability, yeah.
Hmm.
Either swinging into hyperarousal, think anxiety, panic attacks, constant vigilance, feeling jumpy,
Right.
or hyperarousal, that feeling of numbness, shut down, dissociation, feeling checked out. When you're constantly operating outside your window of tolerance, you lose flexibility. You become perpetually reactive, disorganized.
Which explains why trauma survivors can often feel so brittle or easily overwhelmed. It's a physiological loss of that regulatory capacity.
Precisely. It's not just in their head.
So strength isn't just about toughing out the initial hardship. It's fundamentally about the nervous system's ability to dynamically recover afterwards.
Yes.
And when we look at severe trauma, your sources, particularly Peter Levine's work, define the trauma itself in a really interesting way, not just as a bad memory, but related to the body's response being incomplete.
Right. Levine's work frames trauma not purely as an emotional memory that needs reprocessing, but as the enduring physical imprint of uncompleted survival instinct.
Uncompleted instincts.
Think about it. During a truly life-threatening event, the nervous system mobilizes a massive amount of energy for fight or flight, survival energy.
Okay.
But if that active physical response gets blocked, maybe you're trapped, overpowered, frozen in terror if it gets suppressed because the organism is helpless. That immense activation doesn't just evaporate.
It gets stuck.
It gets locked into the nervous system. It keeps cycling, searching endlessly and unsuccessfully for a way to complete the survival response. This escalates the terror and helplessness internally and leads to classic trauma symptoms like flashbacks, chronic muscle tension, hypervigilance. The energy is trapped.
So the path to healing, then, isn't necessarily about mentally understanding it better or remembering every detail perfectly.
No, primarily.
No.
According to this model, recovery requires the organism, the body, to finally complete the active physical response, the fight, the flight, the movement that was previously frozen.
How does that happen?
Often it happens therapeutically through very subtle movements, maybe tremors or intentional actions that allow that pent-up survival energy to finally discharge safely.
So it's a biological completion.
Exactly. And this transformation, this discharge, it really has very little to do with the objective accuracy of the memory itself. It's about releasing the unresolved, trapped activation in the nervous system. Once that energy is discharged, it becomes available again. It allows for flexibility, spontaneity, being present in the moment.
Instead of being stuck repeating the trauma response.
Precisely. It replaces that compulsion. And this is why some techniques that maybe push for intense emotional reliving without facilitating this biological completion can sometimes be counterproductive. They risk just re-traumatizing or escalating the arousal without providing the discharge.
That really clarifies the biological side of resilience. Now, let's bring in the emotional component, specifically how we treat ourselves when we mess up or face threats. A lot of people default to harsh self-criticism, right? Thinking it's motivating.
Oh yeah, that's a very common default. The inner critic.
But your sources argue, quite strongly actually, that self-compassion is the real mechanism of strength here, not weakness.
It really is. It's framed as the brave active response, the foundation for psychological antifragility. Self-compassion has three core components.
Darn.
Self-kindness, treating yourself with understanding when you suffer. Recognizing common humanity, realizing that suffering and imperfection are part of the shared human experience, you're not alone in it. And mindfulness, observing your painful thoughts and feelings without judgment.
Okay, so how is being kind to yourself when you fail actually strong?
Because when faced with a threat or a failure, our instinctive threat response system often defaults to self-criticism and isolation. Beat yourself up, don't let anyone see, which are highly activating stressful responses.
Right, more adrenaline, more cortisol.
Exactly. Self-compassion actively works to override that harsh instinct. It shifts the source of safety away from that threat response.
Fight, flight, freeze.
And towards the biologically calming, oxytocin-driven tend and befriend response system.
Tend to befriend, like nurturing and seeking connection.
Yes. And when directed inwards, this manifests as what Kristen Neff calls brave, empowered clarity. This isn't about being soft or letting yourself off the hook. No. Active, engaged kindness actually compels us to act. It gives us the clarity and courage to demand fair treatment both from ourselves and others. It's the foundation for setting strong boundaries, for protesting injustice, for fighting for our needs and goals, but without that cloud of fear, shame, and guilt that self-criticism generates.
So by cultivating that internal kindness, we actually create a better internal environment for learning from mistakes and seeing the potential for growth, like that post-traumatic growth we started with.
Exactly. It fosters an internal environment that supports learning and growth, rather than judgment and shutdown. It's fundamentally strengthening.
Okay, but we don't exist in a vacuum. Our growth, our move towards being more resilient, more anti-fragile, it often bumps right up against the people around us, our relationships.
Oh, absolutely.
If I start changing for the better, getting healthier, why would my marriage or maybe a close friendship actually resist that positive change? That seems counterintuitive.
It feels counterintuitive, but it's a devastatingly common reality for people on a growth path. It happens because relationships, especially long-term ones like marriages, inevitably find a kind of dynamic balance, an equilibrium, often built around the existing level of function or dysfunction.
So the dysfunction becomes part of the stability.
In a way, yes. Eric Berne, who developed transactional analysis, observed this very clearly. He found that if one partner significantly changes, say, they get well from an addiction, or they simply start refusing to engage in old, destructive patterns or games, the relationship frequently enters a crisis.
Even though the change is positive for the individual.
Even then, because the old pattern, however painful it might have been, was at least predictable. That predictability can feel safer than an unknown future, even a potentially better one.
Can you explain these games Byrne talked about? What are they and how do they provide a benefit, even if it's negative?
Byrne cataloged dozens of these games. They're basically complex, repetitive patterns of interaction between people. They often generate negative feelings like frustration or desperation, but crucially, they provide some kind of hidden secondary payoff that actually stabilizes the relationship or meets some unconscious need.
Like what? Give us an example.
Okay, take the game Byrne called Uproar. It typically involves a couple having a sudden, intense fight over something seemingly trivial. It often escalates quickly, maybe ends with slamming doors, temporary separation.
Okay, that sounds unpleasant. What's the hidden payoff?
The payoff might be that it guarantees a high level of attention and intense emotional engagement, even if it's negative. It confirms, on some level, I am important enough for you to get this worked up about me. Or it avoids dealing with deeper intimacy issues.
I see. Or what about blemish?
Blemish is where one partner is constantly, habitually searching for small flaws or imperfections in the other. Nitpicking. Right. It's undermining. It feels awful for the person being criticized. But the game might provide the blemish picker with a sense of control or superiority, or it might serve to keep intimacy at bay by focusing on superficial flaws. It stabilizes the dynamic in its own dysfunctional way.
So the game itself, however damaging, becomes a form of predictable, guaranteed connection, even if it's a negative form.
Exactly. It structures time, it provides roles, it confirms certain beliefs about self and others. So when one partner suddenly gets well, meaning they sober up, they go to therapy, they simply refuse to play their assigned role in uproar or blemish anymore.
The other partner panics.
Often, yes. The other partner suddenly lacks the script, the conceptual tools to understand this new behavior. They might experience the change not as positive growth, but as a massive threat to the relationship's established equilibrium. The whole structure feels like it's collapsing because the game, the stabilizer, is gone.
So giving up the game is necessary for real intimacy and excitement.
It's the absolute prerequisite.
But it simultaneously threatens the old, predictable stability, which can lead to resistance, anger, maybe even the end of the relationship.
Sadly, yes. It's a very difficult transition point.
That struggle with change also seems mirrored in something else the sources highlight: fundamentally differing needs for intimacy. We tend to assume everyone wants the same level of closeness, don't we?
We do, and that assumption causes so much trouble in relationships. Recognizing and respecting differing, legitimate needs for intimacy and independence is crucial to avoid that chronic, painful, anxious avoidance cycle.
Explain that cycle again.
It's when one person generally has a strong, consistent need for closeness, reassurance, and connection. That's the anxious attachment style. And they end up partnered with someone who has a strong need for independence, space, and autonomy, and who might feel easily overwhelmed by too much closeness. That's the avoidant attachment style.
And that mismatch leads to
Chronic unhappiness and misunderstanding. The anxious partner feels perpetually unmet and pursues connection, which makes the avoidant partner feel smothered and retreat further, which then triggers more anxiety and pursuit from the anxious partner. It's a self-perpetuating loop.
Okay, so how does a relationship move towards becoming a secure base for both people? That sounds like the goal for resilience within a partnership.
Building a secure relationship means intentionally designing a system where both individuals' core needs can be met. It's not about one person winning or the other compromising completely.
So the anxious partner needs to get the reassurance and closeness they crave,
Yes, reliably and consistently.
and the avoidant partner needs to feel confident they'll have the independence and space they need to feel comfortable and not trapped.
Exactly. And secure individuals, people who have a generally secure attachment style themselves, often play a key role in facilitating this shift if they're in the relationship. They tend to act as sort of effective communication coaches implicitly. They can regulate their own nervous system better, stay calmer during conflict, communicate their needs clearly, and generally expect positive reactions because they have a fundamental belief in their own worthiness and their partner's goodwill.
And that models security for the less secure partner.
Yes, that modeled security, combined with learning explicit communication skills about needs and boundaries, can slowly, gradually shift the dynamic away from the anxious avoidant tug of war towards mutual understanding and security.
Okay, finally, let's tie all these different threads together. The psychological mindset, the biological regulation, the relational security, and bring it back to resilience in the face of really extreme, maybe existential suffering. Viktor Frankl's work seems essential here.
Absolutely essential.
He argues that our ability to endure hardship, to maintain hope against all odds, is inextricably linked to finding a higher purpose or meaning.
Frankel's experiences as a prisoner in Nazi concentration camps led him to develop logotherapy, therapy centered on the search for meaning in life. What he observed, quite starkly, was that those prisoners who lost all hope, those who concluded that their suffering was utterly meaningless, they often declined rapidly and died. In those conditions of absolute existential emptiness, finding some sense of purpose, some meaning, some perspective beyond the immediate horror wasn't a philosophical luxury. It was a crucial, life-sustaining psychological mechanism.
So the belief isn't necessarily that life will be easy or even fair, but that one's own struggle, maybe even in its apparent futility, has some kind of inherent dignity or meaning.
Yes. How does finding meaning help overcome such profound adversity?
Meaning acts as the ultimate psychological anchor, the ultimate move towards antifragility, because it forces the individual to transcend their immediate overwhelming circumstances.
I'll say.
Individuals who could hold on to a belief that they had some purpose, maybe a future task waiting for them, a loved one they desperately wanted to see again, perhaps a deep spiritual conviction about their role in the bigger picture. They were fundamentally better equipped psychologically to endure the trauma and keep moving forward. It transforms the experience.
It transforms the experience from just meaningless, crushing affliction into something else, maybe a spiritual test, an existential struggle that holds inherent dignity, a reason to keep going. They couldn't control the horrific external suffering, but Frankl realized they could still choose their attitude towards that suffering. And that choice, that assertion of inner freedom, was the ultimate act of resilience.
It's the realization that our ability to endure is anchored almost entirely in the value, the meaning we assign to that endurance itself.
Exactly right. That conviction, that sense of meaning, prevents the individual from being completely overwhelmed, from losing all hope. It transforms the potential for trauma into an experience that, unbelievably, can even lead to profound personal growth, aligning perfectly with that idea of post-traumatic growth we started with.
What a powerful note to bring things together on.
Yeah. So if we try to synthesize all these different findings from, the neural pruning that sharpens the brain to the vagal break giving us capacity to calm down, from the growth mindset reframing failure as data, all the way to Frankl's logotherapy elevating suffering through meaning, the core message seems pretty undeniable.
Which is?
That true, deep, lasting strength isn't really achieved by trying to dodge all cognitive or emotional stress.
In fact, the paradox seems to be that attempting to create total safety, total comfort, paradoxically makes us more fragile psychologically.
Exactly. The real path to anti-fragility seems to be through developing the systemic capacity, both in our minds and in our bodies, to actively process that stress.
Yeah.
To see challenges as temporary, as specific.
And crucially, as opportunities for necessary structural change and learning. That really feels like the difference between just surviving and actually thriving.
Couldn't agree more. Building resilience, then, involves actively, intentionally increasing your tolerance for necessary discomfort.
Whether that's learning to sit with the tension of cognitive dissonance without immediately shutting down,
Right. Or adopting self-compassion when your instinct is to lash out at yourself.
or maybe even gently allowing your body to complete the biological cycle of a long-frozen trauma response.
Yes, it means rejecting that destructive all-or-nothing cycle we talked about and committing instead to continuous incremental refinement by always seeking out that zone of just manageable difficulty.
And that kind of commitment, it really requires an honest look at our current defenses, doesn't it? Our
Mhm.
psychological immune system is incredibly good at protecting us, at maintaining that stable, coherent sense of self.
Often by filtering out or minimizing uncomfortable truths, it's designed for stability, not necessarily for growth.
Which leads us directly to our final provocative thought for you, the listener, to maybe mull over.
If the ultimate goal is genuine anti-fragility, genuine strength built through challenge, what are the uncomfortable realities, the necessary internal conflicts, or maybe the self-defeating relationship patterns or games that you might currently be avoiding, minimizing, or rationalizing away?
And what might happen, what potential for growth and strength could be unlocked if you were to face them, gently but directly.